11 o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, along with you after a nice long weekend. Hopefully it was relaxing for you guys. Chris, haven't seen you since last Tuesday. It's been almost a week now.
Is there something you're trying to tell me?
No,
keep bringing that earlier.
No, I'm not.
He's telling Terry, Chris wasn't here on Wednesday. So
No, I was just reminding you. It was myself and Wes
Y'all
holding
missed
down
me.
the fort.
Y'all missed me.
You didn't get to have our conversation about July 4th plates, which that's your loss.
It is.
I did the show from a car, so
Wes was a lot more dedicated than I was. That's true.
Most unique venue you've done a show from?
probably not. Honestly, I mean, I've written some stories from weird places. It's not as good. Have you seen? No one else will care about this, so I'll keep it quick. But the Matt Connolly.
I thought that's exactly where my head went.
So Matt Connolly,
we got to find this for Tyler.
has worked for several different. Like he worked for the state at one point. He covered Clemson at one point. He now actually works for On 3. And there's a shot of him filing a story up against a wall right beside a dumpster, like on his laptop. So in today's world where everything is mobile, you file from all over.
Do what you got to do to get the job done, I guess. Hopefully a good 4th for you guys. I guess the final reset before we get into the lead up to college football season. Obviously, SEC Media Day is coming up next week. We're 54 days away from kickoff. Like, this is where things kind of get into that next gear as we get closer and closer to the season starting.
54 days.
54 days.
Unlike Colin Taylor, I love a good countdown.
Well, he loves it now that he doesn't have to worry about it as much.
But before
he detested it, and I brought it up just to annoy him. Now, you don't like the countdown to week 0 because you don't recognize week 0.
Recognize week 0 as a week. It's not a thing.
So for you, it's 54 days. For the rest of us, 47 days. So counting a little over a month and a half.
I like the countdown. I like better is weeks. So we have 7. I think it's 7 Saturdays.
So when people say it like that, there's only 7 Saturdays left.
Yeah.
It makes it feel so close.
It does.
I feel like
it does.
Because you're like
the week flies by.
Yeah, the week. The older you get, too, the faster time goes.
Yeah, very true. Well, again, SEC Media Day is coming up next week, and we'll dive into who's going to be representing South Carolina as the week goes along and what we're expecting to hear from Coach Beamer. Coming up next Monday, he'll be one of the first coaches that we hear speak at Media Days out there in Dallas. But despite the fact that it was a long weekend for the holiday, that did not slow down things on the recruiting trail, as South Carolina did get another welcome home over the weekend. This coming from yet another linebacker adding to this class with Jaden Breaker out of Snellville in Georgia.
Yeah, and so he committed to Shane Beamer on 4th of July, which causes a little scramble, but then did not go public, obviously, until the weekend. And this is a guy we'd been tracking for really a while. I wouldn't say it's one you look back and say, we've been tracking that guy for a year, but just relatively the last couple of months, and really you go back to the beginning of June when we went into the kind of the June OV season. Breaker was a guy coming off of his official visit to South Carolina that really you felt like South Carolina was in a good spot, but he didn't shut things down. He wanted to take his visits. He wanted to go see some of the other programs that were involved with him. I always got the impression, maybe an NC State could make a run. They were one of the schools that were involved pretty early. I think they were involved with him before they even offered. Like, they kind of had built that relationship there. Kentucky with defensive guys, they've always done a pretty good job of getting some under-the-radar guys out of the state of Georgia. So I wondered, okay, will they have a little bit of staying power here? Chris, it never really felt to me like another school completely popped into really just pushing South Carolina. I feel like, sometimes you'll start to hear, South Carolina's been in great shape, but now this school is making a run. Maybe they did, but I never got wind of, there being a huge just opponent here for South Carolina on the recruiting trail. Like, it felt like they maintained that lead pretty solidly after the official visit. And, we can get into the linebacker class as a whole now because I think there's some intriguing things there in the approach they've taken. But we'll stick with Breaker and just his recruitment for now. Really, I got the impression when they offered in April That was when he was on campus for an unofficial visit. You know how sometimes there's an offer and you're just like, they offer, we'll see. Other times it just feels like, for whatever reason, there's a ton of mutual interest. And in this case, he visited, he got the offer, and it, to me, instantly felt like South Carolina was probably going to be one of his finalists.
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting recruitment from that standpoint, right? A lot of the guys that South Carolina tends to land with where they are as a program, you don't see usually South Carolina offer a guy that has a bunch of other offers late and then grab that prospect. There are a few programs nationally that can do that. Georgia's one, where they're like, we think we like that guy, and they can grab them late. Usually, South Carolina's winning formula under Shane Beamer especially has been playing the long game. You think back to the 2024 class and all of those, Cam Pringle, Blake Franks, Dante Reno, Josiah Thompson, all those guys that they had recruited for it seemed like a really long time. Breaker's kind of an outlier because the staff liked him, and he was kind of a later bloomer on the recruiting trail too, but didn't offer him, like you said, Wes, until they got him in on that spring visit, and he had some other suitors at that point. The Gamecocks got him in on the first official visit weekend, and then they were able to survive the Kentucky visit. They survived Rutgers. They survived NC State and some others and were able to land him. The interesting thing you brought up, I think, Wes, about some of the other schools that have pursued him, this isn't a guy that has, the Georgia, Bama, all like the slew of big-time blue blood offers. But you look at the size profile and some of the things he can do, looks like a good prospect. And he also has an interesting offer list in that he was offered by some schools that have done really well defensively recruiting. You mentioned Kentucky, NC State's another one. I saw a graphic over the weekend by this Twitter account, College Football Report, and they had kind of these different tiers of, elite, schools that are elite with elite talent, schools that win with less talent, schools that don't win as much with seemingly great talent. And it was interesting that NC State was in that group, and Utah, of schools that have won with less talent. And you look at, some of the pro guys they put out, their win-loss records, their defenses over the years. You think of Utah and NC State, you think of tough, hard-nosed defensive teams. I think he really fits the profile of one of those more under-the-radar guys who has a lot of traits that you like.
And as Wes alluded to a moment ago, this being the third linebacker in the 2025 class, this is a definite this is a definite position of need when you look at what's going to be happening over the course of the next year, because you're going to be losing a lot of guys out of that room. Debo Williams, Ben Martin Scott, Demetrius Knight, Bengali Kamari, all listed as seniors going into this year. So you need to kind of replenish that room, which you can do in the transfer portal to a degree, but you do need to have that foundation of younger guys. You're bringing in Wendell Gregory and J.R. Johnson as freshmen this year, but you want to have that continued run of guys coming in every single year, and adding a pretty heavy linebacker class this next year kind of sets you up for success going forward.
Yeah, and I think when we talked about, if you go back to losing Pup Howard, losing Stone Blanton via the portal this past offseason, one thing we talked about then is that, hey, South Carolina will go to the portal if they have to. But what they really wanted was to, now it's worked out for them this year, actually, frankly, for the better in terms of what they're going to be able to put on the field this season. But what they really want to be able to do at that linebacker spot is bring guys in, develop them, let them get acclimated to their scheme and system and the coaches, and keep them here. And I know to an extent that's what everybody wants to do. So they have taken, I would say, a little bit of an old school approach to saying, look, we're losing a bunch of guys. Now, you do hope internally that J.R. Johnson and Wendell Gregory can use this season as a springboard into next year where, I mean, frankly, they could be starters. But they decided to take a big class at linebacker. I expect them to likely take one more. So it's going to be a 5-man high school linebacker class and really just replenish that position. Now, Breaker is a guy a little bit raw, but as we kind of look through the various linebackers in this group, and it may go over to the next segment, a lot of them, they've decided, look, even if a guy's a little bit more raw on the field, we're going to lean into length, speed, athleticism, and not to wear out our J.R. Johnson comparison, but Breaker, I was looking back through some of my notes I'd picked up on the different linebackers, and Breaker is actually the one who I was told kind of most compares to J.R. Johnson at the same stage in that this is a kid, he ran a 4.52 40-yard dash at Georgia's camp. There was a little bit of buzz like, all right, is Georgia going to step in late and potentially offer this kid? And, he sort of fits that just twitchy, superior athlete at that position. And, you got several guys in this class that maybe are a little bit more edge types that are kind of transitioning linebacker. Then you've got some guys who are more used to playing in space. And so Breaker, I think, is a little bit more used to playing in space, though he does rush the passer some if you look at his film. And I think when y'all interviewed him after his official visit, he mentioned the Sam linebacker spot, but also I think is a guy who could potentially play the will. Like, I don't necessarily think he's like your middle linebacker type or your edge type. I think he's more of one of those true Sam or Will linebackers within South Carolina's scheme.
And I know we'll get into this more on the other side and kind of take a bigger picture look at the linebacker class, but it just struck me in thinking about the type of guy that they've recruited in this class. Like you said, Wes, the link to athleticism, traits, and what is something that we've talked about so much with the fan base in Columbia. There's always been this, God, why can't we be a little bit better at linebacker, right? You think they've had a guy that's really good every now and then, and like Sky Moore and Ernest Jones. Like, they've had a guy, but they haven't had that deep across-the-board group. I think a lot of it, man, is if you go back and look at some of the older classes, they didn't have a ton of size in there. There were a lot of guys that were 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot, 6'1". You look at this group, it looks totally different. You see guys in here where you look at it and you project out NFL-type body types.
We'll continue this conversation of evaluating this linebacker group as a whole as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls on your Monday here on the game.
All right, everybody, I want to take a few minutes here to tell you about our friends over at Firehouse Subs. Shout out to Larry Chandler, owner and operator of all 14 Midlands Firehouse Subs locations. If you're hungry like I am, it's 11:13 here on the game. Check out the Rapid Rescue to go to avoid the wait and order online. All of your Firehouse Subs favorites, and I'm looking at it, guys, it's still here for a limited time, the barbecue Cuban sub. Southern roots with a Cuban twist. Make sure you get it before it's gone. But, of course, all 14 Midlands Firehouse Subs locations still has all your Firehouse Subs favorite. The Turkey Bacon Ranch, the Club on a Sub, the Hero, whatever your jam is, they got it for you. FirehouseSubs.com, or our favorite way, the Firehouse Subs app. You can earn yourself some rewards toward future purchases. Get yourself some free Firehouse Subs by registering for a free account using the Rapid Rescue to go to avoid the wait and order online. Again, that's FirehouseSubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app. Get it today.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Towerhead, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you, recapping the Jaden Breaker commitment for South Carolina over the holiday weekend as he now becomes another linebacker in this 2025 class. But I'll ask something that I think a lot of people say whenever we get a new commitment, especially when you look at this 2025 class. Okay, here's another 3-star linebacker to add to this group of 4 so far.
You've been reading Gamecock Twitter a little bit there, Tyler?
It's
Wes, I think
you got to pay attention to it. Where's the optimism? What should the optimism for this group of linebackers be for this class?
Is Tyler in the 3-star mafia?
3-star mafia, he is.
I'm not in the 3-star mafia, but it's a question that people are going to ask. So what is the optimism for this group of linebackers?
Have I created a thing with the 3-star mafia?
I hope so.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, guys, look, it is a really big class if it ultimately ends up where I think it's going to be with 5 high school linebackers committed, and that would have to include Donovan Darden, who I believe is what you would probably say is the final sort of piece of the puzzle, final guy they're really targeting at linebacker in the high school ranks. And so, Chris, there is some projection here. Like these are not, obviously they would have loved to have had like a Zayden Walker, 5-star guy who you would say is about as no-brainer of a prospect as you could have at that position. And so are any of these guys that, frankly, they're not. Like, we can acknowledge that. I think, like with anything in recruiting, especially, here's the thing about 3-star guys, and I look at it like percentages, in my opinion. So the percentage chance of a 5-star coming in and being a contributor in some way is a higher chance than, on average, your 4-star. And then your 4-star, on average, there's going to be a better chance that he's really good than a 3-star guy, frankly, is how it works. Now, that doesn't mean that a 3-star can't be better than a 5-star in an individual basis. Yep. So I think for South Carolina, you got to look at this if you're a fan. Let's say they do add Donovan Darden to this mix. Your 5 guys, they're all 3-stars. Chances are all 5 guys are not going to pan out. Like, that's just how numbers work when it comes to football. What you got to hope really is that from an evaluation and then developmental, I would say, aspect, that like 2 to 3 of the 5 end up panning out. Now, you don't know which 2 to 3 those are a lot of times because, you were just telling me you were looking back at some classes from a number of years ago. I mean, I'll go back and I'll be like, man, I thought that guy was going to pan out. They didn't. I'll be like, I had some questions about this guy. He ended up being really good. And then, there's somewhere in between that answer too where probably a guy or 2 out of this group will be solid contributors, maybe never a superstar. You know what I'm saying? I think with 5-star guys and sort of no-brainer types, you really are starting to get up into, like, what is their upside as well. And I do think with this group, they have decided if we're going to miss, we're going to miss with length and athleticism. Yep. And so some of these guys are a little bit more raw. I would say, Chris, you go through this group, the one guy that doesn't quite fit that mold that I'm talking about, you would say is probably an A.J. Holloway. He's a little bit more of he's a big kid, more of a true middle linebacker, a little bit more developed physically, probably has a little bit more ready-to-play SEC body, I would think, from a physicality standpoint. Maybe doesn't quite have the upside when you start looking at a Jacoel Hallman who plays at a smaller school, plays like 3 different positions, is going to be transitioning to linebacker. Some of these other guys, Tayshawn Austin, he's a little bit more, he's kind of a tweener in that he's sort of an edge, but sort of a linebacker, I think. And so it's going to be really, in my opinion, about taking the natural athleticism of a lot of these guys and developing it when they get on campus. And, Chris, you mentioned the lack of size at times. I mean, frankly, how about the lack of speed at times from that position as well in the past? Sure. And I think with this group, if you can develop a couple of them to their potential, then you are talking about continuing to have speed and athleticism, which is frankly something I think this current group, the one on campus right now for this season, is going to have as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you look at guys, and in some ways, the linebacker room, like the linebacker room you have now, it is kind of on paper, but what we do know is they have some guys that have been very productive, whether it's here at South Carolina or some other spots. They've got a mix of different types of guys, different sizes, skill sets, things that they do well. If this class could end up kind of ultimately mirroring that class, then that's probably a win for you. You know, you're going to have some guys that are more of a standout than others. You're probably going to have some guys in this group that are role players. I mean, you made a great point. If you take 5 linebackers, if they all pan out to some degree, then you've done pretty well on your evaluations. I think when you talk ultimately about not just guys panning out, but can you build a recruiting class that ultimately can help you compete against, you know, the Georgias of the world and, you know, Texas and Oklahoma, all these different schools, you don't have to just pan out. You need to be really, really good, right? But there could be some guys in that group, in this group, that help you do that. That they have physical traits that are more like you're looking at them in their juniors and seniors in college, and they're big and they're fast and they've continued to develop because they already carry some of those traits in. If you come into college, and not to say that undersized linebackers who aren't the fastest can't be good. We've seen plenty of them who are just great college players. But if you recruit a room full of linebackers that are, 5'11", 220 and run 4.8, you can't have a room full of those guys in the year 2024. You need guys with length, speed, athleticism, versatility. And they do appear to have some of that. So I don't think these guys, not all rankings are created equal. Not all groups are created equal. If they had 4 guys and ultimately they want to take 5, as you said, that were more along the lines of guys who are smaller, who aren't as athletic, I don't think you would feel as good about it ultimately.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. And I do think this class right here gives them kind of a little bit more of a look to the future for this position, whereas I think you're going to take all this information. If you want to fast forward to December, frankly, let's see how these guys continue to develop as seniors in high school as well. That's a big part of this. Look at J.R. Johnson and the thought on him this time last year versus, and even if you want to rewind a couple months before he started going up to camps and running these great times and all these things. Now fast forward to his senior year, then fast forward to now, which we're hearing this kid's going to be too good to possibly keep off the field. And some of these guys we may start to hear, they've made a big jump already in their senior years. And, with J.R. Johnson and Wendell Gregory, how internally we may not be seeing it because there's so many upperclassmen ahead of them. What's the feel internally as far as their progression this season? Then I think you're going to take all that information and make the decision on, all right, do we need – I think ultimately you still are going to look to take a portal guy or 2 at this position. But even that could fluctuate in terms of, all right, do we need to go out and find a starter? Do we need to go out and just find some depth? What exactly does that look like? And so to me, that would be determined by on the field this year, plus what are you seeing about, the high school guys and their progression there in their high school senior season and just the overall progression of that room.
In the 2025 class continuing to come together, a lot of linebackers being featured in it. They did lose one particular member of that class this past weekend, officially, though the rumors were leading up to it for a couple of weeks there. We'll dive into that coming up. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
If you're looking to take your home or your business to the next level from an audiovisual standpoint, let me recommend our friends over at Integrated Media. Michael and Nathan and their team do an incredible job with anything you need from an AV standpoint. They can do security and cameras. They can do TV installations, audio and video, home theater, or complete smart home solutions where you can control your lights, your thermostat, your sound systems, TVs, security cameras, and alarms, all from the touch of a button on your phone. They've been to my home. They've been to Wes's home. They can come out to yours and do the same for you. Whatever you may need, you don't have to go to the big box stores to find your equipment. You can find a local, helpful company who can source the equipment and install it for you at your home or business and do an incredible job. IntegratedMediaInc.com or 803-948-8327 is how you can get in touch with them. IntegratedMediaInc.com. Give them a call.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you here on your Monday on the Game. We'll continue our conversation about Gamecock recruiting. Did get some bad news over the weekend, but first head out to the Love Chevrolet phone lines. Bobby in Charlotte wants to talk a little bit of recruiting. Bobby, appreciate your call this morning. What's on your mind?
Hey, guys. Yeah. Hey, I've just been surprised. I was wondering if the guys could maybe speak to this. Are you surprised by what seems like kind of an overnight, halt to the momentum? When you look back the first couple of years, and certainly coming off of the 22 season, Shane had done such a great job just kind of invigorating the fan base, and it just seemed to be so much momentum. And is the kind of what you guys are joking about, I like that, the three-star mafia, is there's a lot of angst, obviously, on Gamecock Twitter. Are you surprised by what kind of seems like such a just kind of flip the switch, a shutting off of that momentum based on one bad season last year? And then I just wonder, like on a personal note, you guys have been doing this recruiting thing for a long time. Does it ever get frustrating as far as if we're not having a great recruiting season, having to kind of, quell the, the negativity that's out there and try and maybe put more of a positive frame on it?
No, good questions there, Bobby. I appreciate your calling in 803-404-6100. We can really tie this in, especially his first question there to the Shamari Earls official decommitment yesterday, which we knew was coming for a while, but he did flip his commitment over to Georgia, and he was the top-rated guy in this class before doing that. But some good points he brings up there, because it does seem like people are a little antsy with this recruiting class compared to the ones of the past couple of years.
Yeah, and I think, and great call, because I think he's absolutely right. It's not just the recruiting class right now that I think people are a little bit like that about. It seems like, we're already at the point of just jumping to the immediate most negative take on everything, I feel like. And, and to answer his second question there too, it does get a little bit frustrating when just you're dealing with negativity all the time, which I think that's not the entire fan base, right? Like I do think it is easy to get caught up into the Twitter is real life, message boards are real life. So some of Twitter, some of what you see on message boards, just people venting, people getting it off their chest. And so I do think, to his point, and I think this is part of a greater just where things are right now in the world, where we talk about like microwave society and wanting something instantly. And in the same way, if you don't get it, if you're a fan base and you don't get what you're wanting instantly, it happens very quickly. Like that thing turns in a second. And now if you're Shane Beamer, if you're the staff, if you're this team, you can actually flip it back almost just as quickly. And, we saw that with Missouri this past season. Missouri is sitting there seemingly just stuck in the mud. A couple of very just mediocre 500 type seasons, and then boom, they have as much momentum, I feel like, as anybody in the country. Now, if they have a couple of setbacks this year, lose a couple of games they're not supposed to, they'll probably get turned on just as quickly as well. So I do think when you talk about momentum and stuff like that, this recruiting class, Chris, I believe has been affected by kind of that lost momentum that we saw on the field this past season, because South Carolina overachieved the first 2 years. I feel like there is a sense of not giving – I don't feel like people are giving Beamer enough credit for overachieving the first 2 years. And some have instantly turned on him for this past season, while two things can be true as well. It is a win-now world at this point, especially with the transfer portal. However, people have already sort of just forgotten that this was a 2-win team when Beamer took over.
Yeah, during COVID, you couldn't recruit. Yeah, all those things can be true. You can be incredibly frustrated by this past season, and that's fair. But recognize the other part of it too. And I think it's all about where you go from here. Have they lost some momentum on the trail? I would say overall, yes, when you look at some of the things that have happened. And I'll get into, I agree with you, Wes, largely there, or I completely agree with you. I got a couple other things to add to that in a second, though, as to why. You know, this class, you did pick up, 10 commitments roughly, 10, 11, something like that, over the course of the summer. Remember back during the spring, people were going, where are all the commitments? Well, you did have that flurry of them, and it did include some players that we think are going to be quality players. It did include, despite the jokes we're making about the three-star mafia, it did include some four-star players. Shed Surratt, Jaquavius Dodd. It hasn't been all 3 stars. Has it largely been? Yes, it has. They've also lost out on some bigger fish, some bigger targets that were out there. Losing Shamari Earls is, the latest example of that. That was your highest ranked commitment. So it's been a mixed bag. There's some good, there's some bad. I do think there's a few things playing in right now that have been, kind of in the works and some more immediate. Number one, you do have the season. Like when you slip on the field like that, sometimes it does kind of hamper and hurt some of your momentum. Number two, I do think that South Carolina is not where it could or is going to be on the NIL front. Now, some people listening may roll their eyes. I don't want to hear about that. I'm sorry if you don't, but it is a part of it now. It's been documented that it's a part of it. Wes, you just mentioned Missouri. If you ask anybody around Missouri, and I know people who cover that program closely, that is the impetus for why they have gotten better. When they were going 6-6 or 6-7 or whatever it was in back-to-back years, instead of saying when we win 10 games, we'll be good at NIL, they figured it out. They came up with a very aggressive plan. Part of that was the state law that they put into place. That was part of it. And they started recruiting better. Voila. Just like magic, just like that. It's a big part of it now. And Eli Drinkwitz went into the 2023 season literally on the hot seat. Like, there are people like, he might get fired. Had a great year. Now they're on a historic recruiting run, So I think NIL is another part of it. The season that they just had is another part of it. I even think, there's been some changes on staff recently. Taylor Edwards not being in his player personnel post. You have a transition period. People like that are very important in the recruiting process. I think we've seen some things with that behind the scenes that, there's just a little bit of kind of a gap, a little bit of a waiting period to see how it sorts out there.
And with, again, because you got to give Beamer credit for what he's done in the past couple of cycles, and this one obviously hasn't quite stacked up to where the past couple have been. How, I don't want to say concerning or detrimental is the right word here, how big of an effect, ripple effect, I guess is the best way to phrase it, does a class that maybe is taking a little bit of a step back in 2025, where we sit right now, compared to the others, affect you going forward?
Yeah, I think it depends on, well, first of all these classes are going to be judged when they go play the game. So it could turn out, we could all be wrong. Like, it could be that some of these guys are just better than we think. Now, again, I firmly believe, I don't believe in the star system in terms of, you can create outliers on anything. Like, any 3-star, I don't look at that and say, oh, he's a 3-star, he's not going to be good. Now, I firmly believe if you recruit all 5 stars, you're going to have a heck of a lot better chance of being really good than if you recruited all 3 stars. That's been kind of proven, I feel like. So let's see how it turns out. I do think this does probably make you, and you really, I don't think this is what they want to be, but they may have to be. You got to be reliant on the portal. Now in today's world, in today's college football, that's an option that used to not exist. So that's helpful. They've been pretty good in the portal. And now if you're going to go portal shopping, NIL is even bigger in the portal than it is in high school recruiting. So you've got to have that part taken care of, I think. So I think what actually is going to be maybe most significant for them on the field at this point. This class that's just arrived on campus, these freshmen, these transfer guys. Now, let's go back to the guys that have been on campus for a full year now. That's two highly recruited classes, two classes that are sort of, I believe, what you're hoping will create the core of your team during the Shane Beamer era. How much progress do we see from those guys? Are these classes going to be on the field what we think they are on paper? And that, to me, is going to determine South Carolina's success this season and moving forward. Even if you have a little bit of a down class, you can pick that up if you can win on the field this year.
Come back and wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on your Monday here on the game.
All right, guys, let me tell you about our friends over at Classic Roofing. Call them right now, 803-590-7870, or head on over to classicroofingsc.com. There you can get more information on their services, and you can set up a free estimate. Lots of storms rolling through the area. There was a big one over the weekend as well. If you have some damage to that roof, some people may tell you, hey, just file a claim, let them take care of it. In the long run, that's maybe not the best thing for you to do. So why not call our friends at Classic Roofing? They're going to take an in-depth look at that roof, any potential damage, and talk to you about some potential fixes, give you options without just blindly telling you to file an insurance claim, which in the long run, like I said, may not be the best thing. Call them today, 803-590-7870. I've got personal relationships with Joe Reeder, Max Sawyer. Promise you, they're going to take great care of you just like they did for me and my wife. ClassicRoofingSC.com. Hit them up today.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you for a few more minutes here on your Monday. And we touched on it a moment ago, but we kind of get a chance to dive into it a little bit more now. But indeed, Shamari Earls yesterday officially announced his flip from South Carolina to Georgia. Again, this is something that we have been tracking for a couple weeks, and we knew it was going to happen, just waiting for the official word from him. But it did happen yesterday. And going back to this overall conversation we've been having this hour, that was your top guy in this class for South Carolina that ends up going elsewhere, and again, doesn't help the current sentiment that a lot of people have with this 2025 class as of right now.
Yeah, and I think it's frustrating for fans, rightfully so, just because of how the class has gone in general on a couple of guys. And then Earls, who, was just so about South Carolina when he first committed. And now, to flip to a school that's in your conference, I do think, you know how when South Carolina sort of decides to offer a guy that's at maybe they're committed to a group of 4 school, and what do we call it? Is it group of 4, group of 5, group of 6,
it's
group
still
of 7?
group of 5.
It's still group of 5,
it's
but we're power 4.
Group of 5.
Moving myself into 2024 here, but it's a process. So I think when you look at that, South Carolina fans never blink twice about just stealing a guy from quote a lower school, but Georgia is kind of doing to South Carolina like they're letting their status be known. Like if you're Georgia, we're getting who we want. And so I think that burns a little bit more for South Carolina fans, rightfully so, for Georgia to be able to just say, look, we're stepping in. We're going to be Georgia on this, and we're just going to take them because that's what we want to do. And there's a reason he was the highest ranked guy in South Carolina's class. He is a true lengthy, speedy, athletic cover corner. And, they're in on some highly rated defensive backs. They have a couple of guys committed as well. But Earls, to me, is your best just true cover corner that they're in on. So that burns a little bit in recruiting. You never get too caught up in losing or getting any one guy. So is the sky falling? No. Is it the end of the world? No. Is it a loss for South Carolina? Yes, because you put a lot of effort and energy into recruiting him in the first place. So if you didn't like him a lot, if you didn't think he had a great opportunity to come in and play in your program, you wouldn't have recruited him in the first place.
Yeah, it stings for sure. There's no way to sugarcoat something like that. And, I think it does speak to the fact that, Georgia it just kind of illustrates it, like flexing their muscles. I've seen some stuff online where there's this kind of like, it's tongue in cheek. There's some humor behind it, but just like this conspiracy theory that Georgia's just like deliberately like, we're just going to take the best players from, we're going to kind of block South Carolina from getting this guy. Remember their defensive line classes, the past few classes, like nobody in the Southeast has been able to sign the top defensive linemen because they're just all going to Georgia. But I think it just speaks more to Georgia, seriously, just looking at Shamari Earls and being like, this is a really good corner. We think he's a guy that can play for us, and they made their push, and that's what it is. And I think for South Carolina, it all this stuff we were talking about just now with Earls and in the last segment, where do you go from here, right? What happens from here? What improvements can you make? And, there's another big recruiting event, coming up at the end of month, Wes. Can they hold on to some guys that they've gotten themselves in a decent position for?
And can they close on a couple of these other guys, I think.
We'll see what happens. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.
All right, guys, before we get out of here, let me tell you about one more great sponsor, our friends over at Gold Line Framing, 803-739-1337. They've been in business for over 20 years. They're over at 511 12th Street, West Columbia, where you can check out their art gallery, their home decor, their furniture, and their gift items all in store. They're going to take care of any and all of your custom framing needs, though. That could be diplomas, original artwork, canvases, jerseys, flags. Maybe you got a signed print that you want to take to the next level and throw it on the wall in the man cave. They're going to handle that for you as well. Honor Kendall Walsh, Johnny James, the manager, two great friends of mine. They're going to take great care of you and all of those custom framing needs. So, again, call them today. Call them right now, 803-739-1337.
Again, that'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock halftime show with Terry Ford coming up next here on the game.